This video is going to have a look at solving quadratic equations using the Null factor law. So the standard form of a quadratic equation is going to be ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Because the equations are equal to 0, we can work out what a value is going to be for x. Given the shape of quadratic equations, our x value could have two or more different values that it could be. So when we are solving quadratic equations, we will normally find multiple values of x. That's not always the case. Sometimes the quadratic equation might only have one value for x. That would be, if we were to graph that equation, it would only have one x-intercept. But normally, given the nature of quadratic equations, we're going to be finding two or more values. So we can solve quadratic equations by a couple of different methods. The first method is graphically, so having a look at a graph or drawing a graph and being able to determine what the x-intercepts are. We can use the Null factor law, which if we are getting an answer of 0, then one of the factors that we are multiplying has to be 0. Or we can use the quadratic equation to be able to work out what our values of x are going to be. In this video, we're going to have a look at the Null factor law to be able to work out what our values of x are. So looking at the Null factor law, if we are multiplying two terms together, so a and b, and the answer to that is 0, then we know that either a has to equal 0 or b has to equal 0, because that is the only way we can get an answer of 0 when we're multiplying two terms together. So to use the Null factor law to be able to solve a quadratic equation, first we'll need to factorize the equation. Sometimes the question will already be in factorized form and you won't need to factorize. Other times it will give you the full expression and then you've got to go ahead and factorize it before you can apply the Null factor law. Once you have factorized it, then you can apply the Null factor law to determine the possible solutions, remembering that you're going to get more than one value of x. So your answer is going to have a couple of different values of x. So let's have a look at an example of how can we apply the Null factor law. So in the example, we want to solve the equation x plus 5, x minus 3 is equal to 0. So for this example, they've already given us an equation in factorized form, so we don't need to factorize it. We can go ahead and apply the Null factor law to work out what my possible values of x are going to be. So remembering in between the brackets is a little imaginary multiplication. So the question is really x plus 5 times x minus 3 is equal to 0. So when we're multiplying those terms together, one of those terms has to equal 0. So therefore, either x plus 5 is equal to 0 or x minus 3 is equal to 0. So now that I know what those are, I can go ahead and find out my values of x. So for x plus 5 is equal to 0, to get x by itself, I need to subtract 5 from both sides. So therefore, x is going to equal to negative 5. And for my second option, x minus 3 is equal to 0. To work out my value of x, I need to plus 3 onto both sides. So x is going to equal to 3. So my two solutions to x plus 5, x minus 3 is equal to 0 are going to be x is equal to negative 5 or x is equal to 3. So what that means is that if we were to graph that onto a Cartesian plane, our x-intercepts would be negative 5 and 3. Let's have a look at what that will look like on a Cartesian plane. And we can see that our graph for x plus 5, x minus 3 is equal to 0. And we can see our x-intercepts are negative 5 and are 3. So when we're solving quadratic equations, that is what we're looking for essentially, is we're looking for our x-intercepts. So that was an example of how we can solve a quadratic equation by using the Null factor law.